Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about virtues and frailties and how we can manage to flourish even in times such as a pandemic. It's a very exciting topic for me. Unfortunately, I made a lot of promises in the abstract and I have a lot to say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go through it very quickly, finish the talk in 15 minutes so that we have some time for Q&A. But I want you to know there's so much more to say about all these topics that I can barely touch on them today. But I'll try to give you as rich a version as I can. And then if you'd like to hear more from me, we can arrange a time to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is two obvious ideas. The first one is that human beings can flourish. And one of the really interesting things we're doing right now is looking into flourishing around the globe. And this term resonates with people. They get it, it's non-technical, it's something that people aspire to. So I love the term flourishing. Second thing, though, is that humans have frailties. We have weaknesses, shortcomings, we suffer, we have limits. So there's a lot of ways in which flourishing is a little complicated. It's not a very simple matter. And then I'm going to use an ancient idea from Aristotle that flourishing is a matter of functioning excellently as the kind of beings that we are. So flourishing is going to be specific to being a human being. And I think that the way he thought of this is that he specifically designed the set of virtues that he told us about to match up to human frailties. So I believe that Aristotle's intention was to tell us, given the kind of frail, weak creatures that we are, what sort of characteristics do we need to cultivate to make us into excellent beings? So if that's true, then human frailties are the pathways to flourishing. They're not obstacles or things that prevent us from flourishing necessarily, but they're ways, if we follow them closely and correctly, will lead us directly to flourishing. So that's the basic idea I'm going to talk with you about. And then I'm going to talk with you about courage, justice, and practical wisdom as three examples of this. And they're particularly pertinent in the pandemic. So if we think about the pandemic reality we have right now, courage is one of the most important virtues going. So what we know from the pandemic is that human beings are vulnerable. We get sick, we die, we can also be exploited. So in the midst of this pandemic, there's been a lot of social unrest about people feeling mistreated and exploited. And so we've had a reckoning about that. At the same time, we're having this reckoning about the pandemic. And no one knows that people are vulnerable better than nurses. So being here with you is humbling to me because I think you face this far more extensively and on a more daily basis than I do. Now, because we're vulnerable, it's natural to feel afraid. It's a sensible response to threat is to feel fear. So fear is a natural part of being a human being, but fear tends to constrain us, to slow us down, to make it harder to do things, to make it harder to take risks. So the purpose of courage is that it allows us to take appropriate action in risky situations. It allows us, it's risk-taking is what courage is about. So because we live with fear all the time and because we're vulnerable, we need courage, and courage is necessary particularly to pursue what is good. And again, this audience knows this better than I do. So when I say what is good, I'm talking about things like physical health, mental health, I'm talking about belonging, I'm talking about close relationships. We need courage in all these situations to defend and pursue what is good. And you know this particularly well when it comes to ensuring that people are healthy. And so appropriate risk-taking is necessary for flourishing. So we have to be courageous if we want to flourish. There's no other way, because if we just shrink from all the things that threaten us, then pretty soon we lose what really matters to us. So what would it mean to be excellent at risk-taking? And this is what the virtue of courage is. It's about taking the proper risks. So courage is not taking unreasonable risks, foolish risks, and it's not about being cowardly. It's about taking the right risks. Well, how do we know which ones are the right ones? First of all, there needs to be something important at stake. So someone's health, someone's life, justice, democracy, these are important things to take risks for, and people are taking them all the time for this. Second, the risk taker has to have knowledge. So it isn't, you just don't go into risk taking blindly and blithely or by accident. You have to know what you're doing. And this is one of the things about being a professional nurse that impresses me, is that you take a lot of risks, but you do so on the basis of your knowledge. You know what's at stake, and you know how to protect yourselves, and that's what you do. Thirdly, the risk taker has to be willing to take the risk. So if you're not willing to take the risk, then that would not count as courage. So something you have to want to do. And I think that's part of how you get into this profession, is that you want to take risks on behalf of the people you serve. And then lastly, we want to make risk-taking second nature. That is, we want to make it habitual. We don't want to have to think and deliberate and debate within ourselves about whether to take risks every single time we need to. Sometimes we need to step back and think about it, but most of the time we want to do it as a matter of habit. And so that's what makes something a virtue. We have to know what's at stake, know what's worthwhile, we have to know what we're doing, we have to be willing to do it, and we have to do it in a habitual way. Those are the things that characterize virtues. So justice is similar. One of the things about humans is we're group living creatures. There are some exceptions to that, of course, but not many. For the most part, we live in social gatherings, and our ancestors have lived in social gatherings as long as there have been human beings. Secondly, we're incredibly cooperative. You may not realize this, but we cooperate constantly and with people we don't even know, and no other species does that. Mostly other animals only cooperate with people they're related to or they know really well. For us, we cooperate readily with strangers. Think about how we do traffic or internet sales. It's incredible, the degree of cooperation. Now, in any human society or any human gathering, benefits and burdens are shared. So there are certain things about our group living that are good for us, and there are certain things that have to be shouldered and handled. And again, with this audience, I don't really have to tell you about this. There's a lot of ways you benefit people, and it's a burden to you. And so we have to find ways to try to make that equitable, fair in our societies, because if we don't, then our cooperation breaks down. So the more people feel exploited or taken advantage of, the less likely they are to be willing to take risks and to put themselves out there to share those burdens. And if someone's taking an unfair share of benefits, it makes it hard for the rest of us to take on our share of burdens and feel that we're getting benefited as well. And now every society has standards of justice. Now they're very different, and they've been different throughout history. So I can't really give you simple answers about what justice means. That would be something we would need hours to talk about. But every society has standards of justice. And so we have some shared agreements about what we think is fair and right. And for the most part, we try to act on those. But it's also always up for debate. In no society are questions of justice ever finally settled, and you never have to think about it again. Something we have to revisit over and over and over again. So that's one of the characteristics of justice, is that it's something that gets deliberated about continuously. And so there are no simple answers. And I can give you a breakdown of different forms of justice and how they're appropriate and so forth, but today's not the day for that. So I'm just going to say there are no simple answers. And even if I give you that breakdown, that doesn't make the answers simple. This is something that requires a lot of deliberation and thought and a lot of careful handling. So what would it mean to be excellent in sharing benefits and burdens? Well, justice is sharing those properly. That's what we mean by that. So we dole out the benefits, we dole out the burdens according to how we think it's fair. And that might have to do with what we need. It might have to do with what we're capable of. It might have to do with leadership. It might have to do with cooperation. But we try to share those things properly. And that's someone who can do that has the virtue of justice. So if we have leaders who can share those benefits and burdens properly, that's great leadership. And when people don't share them properly, that's poor leadership. And so justice is a key part of leadership, in my view. So we need an equitable distribution of benefits and burdens, because as I told you, our cooperation depends on that. And our survival and our ability to do well in communities and societies is completely dependent on our ability to cooperate. The less we can do it, the less well our societies will operate. And the more people will suffer, individuals will suffer as a result. So the just person has knowledge about justice. They understand about what's equitable and what isn't. They understand what the burdens and benefits are. So they know things about justice. And a just person willingly shares. So they have the emotional capacity and the motivation to share willingly. So if I have more than my share of benefits, am I willing to share those with someone else? Am I willing to have a little bit less so that other people can have a little bit more? And a just person, someone who has the virtue of justice, will do that willingly. Also, willingly will take on burdens. So in both cases, that's a strong motivation. Finally, justice needs to be second nature as well. It needs to be something we do without having to think about it too much most of the time. Now, when we're in a very difficult situation, we're going to have to take a step back and deliberate about it. The next topic I want to touch on, practical wisdom, helps us to understand when it is we need to do more thinking and when it is we need to just proceed with our habitual kind of justice. So practical wisdom is a core topic for any virtue ethicist, and I'm a follower of Aristotle, and he made practical wisdom central to his ethics, and I think he was right to do that. So he called it he worked with it as a meta virtue, the kind of thing that helped us to guide our actions in other ways that are positive. So one of the things about practical wisdom is we know that life is complex, and it's gotten more and more complex as time has gone on. Our societies are super intricate, and so we have to think about a lot of different things as we go through life. And it turns out that technical solutions are never enough. Sometimes we hope that technology is going to solve our problems. I mean, this vaccine that's come out, it's fantastic. It's helping us a lot, I think. Not everybody agrees with me, and it's wonderful, but that technical solution isn't enough. We also need the wisdom to guide people to participate in the vaccinations. We need the wisdom to be able to talk about the pros and the cons and the when to do what's. So technical solutions are never enough. Having a vaccine won't solve our problem. Also, we can never have enough rules. So no matter how many rules we make, there always are going to be situations that are going to require judgment. So practical wisdom is a form of good judgment. And so we can never rely simply on rules to solve our problems for us. So to make good decisions, we need good judgment. And that's kind of a truism. It's so simple, it's barely needs to be said, but that's what practical wisdom is. It's using proper judgment in difficult situations or in simple situations, either one, but particularly important when the situations are difficult. And a practically wise decision is one that takes all things into account and makes the best decision, all things considered. And that may or may not be the best thing we could imagine, but we try to do the best thing we can given the circumstances. So wisdom has 4 components. I'm going to run through this real quickly. First one is moral vision, and that's the ability to recognize what's at stake ethically in every situation. What's central, what's peripheral, what's important, what's trivial. So moral vision is essential. If we can't see what's at stake, we can't act on what's at stake. Second component is sometimes we need to harmonize virtues. So sometimes it's real simple. We just need to be courageous, or we just need to be fair. Other times we might have a combination of things going on. So imagine sometimes you need to be very compassionate with your honesty. You know this as nurses, it comes up all the time. Sometimes you may even need to tell a compassionate white lie. So maybe the compassion overrides honesty in some cases. So we need to be able to harmonize virtues, and that's an important piece of wisdom. We need to know what's good. So we need to know what we're aiming at. What is it that's important in life? And what can we do in this situation to promote those good things? And then finally, we want to infuse our emotion with thinking. So we want to guide our emotions so they don't become disproportionate or overwhelming. So sometimes what that means is we just need to appraise a situation properly so that we have the best kind of emotional response to it. So again, this is something that I've written, my colleagues and I have written hundreds of pages on, so I'd be happy to talk about it more another time, but that's practical wisdom in a nutshell. Oops, okay. So now I want to go on to the conclusion. So there are 3 premises that I started with. Human beings can flourish. I think that's pretty straightforward. Human beings have frailties. That's pretty obvious. I mean, all of us know how imperfect we are. And then finally, flourishing, it was defined by Aristotle as excellent functioning as the limited beings that humans are. So I think if we think about flourishing that way, it makes it more attainable. If we think about it as having a beautiful, flawless life, we will never get there. We have to think about it as what would it mean to function really well right now? In a pandemic, that's different than before the pandemic. I mean, we all know that. It's been very difficult. My theses are that humans are vulnerable, therefore we need courage, and that's excellent risk-taking. We're group-dependent creatures, therefore we need justice in order to share benefits and burdens properly. And then human life is complex, meaning that we need wisdom to make good decisions. So the conclusion then is that human beings flourish through our frailties and challenges, not despite them. So although we don't like frailties, we don't not like challenges necessarily, that's the way we're going to have the best kind of life. So that's the way, that's the pathway to get there, not a set of obstacles. So I hope this helps you. I'm thinking of this as a transformative way of thinking and that can move us forward in very positive ways. If you would like to know more, there are some resources, and you can email me at that email address anytime you'd like, and I'll respond the very best I can. Thank you.